Welcome to the darkest corner. Today's tales are about our wildest, darkest dreams and realities. Please enjoy, thank you, and please subscribe.
The Weight of Midnight. Evelyn learned to fear the number 3. It wasn't the number itself, but the time it signified. 3 a.m., the hour she always woke. Not with a jolt, but with a paralyzing, leaden dread. It started subtly, a feeling of cold radiating from the foot of her bed, slowly creeping up the sheets until it settled over her chest like a slab of marble. She initially dismissed it as exhaustion, or perhaps bad feng shui. She changed the mattress, cleared the space with sage, and hung dream catchers until her room looked less like a bedroom and more like a desperate curio shop. But the visits persisted, growing bolder. One week, the weight wasn't merely heavy, it pressed with a definite purpose. She could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of breathing above her own choked gasps, and the air around her, already chilled, began to carry a scent. Something ancient and metallic, overlaid with a sickly sweet perfume, like night-blooming jasmine steeped in rust. The worst night came after she had finally fallen into a deep, dreamless sleep. She awoke to the familiar pressure, but this time, her mind was crystal clear. Her eyes, the only part of her she could control, snapped open into the gloom. At first, there was only the shadow. Then, the shadow sharpened, coalescing into a form draped in the darkness itself. It wasn't the gargoyle or demon she had read about in folklore. It was something far more terrifying in its unsettling perfection. He was breathtakingly beautiful. His hair, dark and glossy as pooled oil, fell across pale, angular features. His eyes, when they opened slowly, fixing on her, were the color of polished slate and held no warmth, no humanity, only the cool, clinical assessment of a predator. He smiled, a slow, predatory curve of the lips that never reached those dead eyes. A cold, impossibly strong hand settled on her jaw. Evelyn tried to scream, to buck, but her body was bound by his unnatural proximity. She felt not pain, but a draining, an absolute emptiness, as if he were siphoning off the very concept of joy and will from her soul. "You're awake," a voice whispered, not into her ear, but inside her skull, low and velvet, yet devoid of soul. Good. It's so much sweeter when you know exactly what you're losing. As the essence of her energy flowed out of her, she understood. This was not a nightmare, it was a feeding. This was the Incubus, an immortal parasite wearing the mask of desire to steal life. He leaned down, and the kiss that followed was colder than any winter, sucking the air and the light from the world. It lasted only a moment, but that moment consumed hours of Evelyn's life force. When the clock tower outside chimed 4, the weight lifted as abruptly as it had arrived. The shadow dissipated, the scent vanished, and suddenly, Evelyn could breathe and move. She lay trembling in the sweat-soaked sheets, completely empty, a husk of the vibrant person she had been hours before. She hadn't been visited by a ghost or a dream, but by a lover of the night, a methodical thief who had stolen everything but her terror. She knew she would sleep again, and she knew that when the hand of the clock touched 3, he would be back. He always came back for the ones who were awake. The perfect duplicate. The silence of the apex tower was a manufactured thing, purified by soundproofing and climate control until it felt less like peace and more like pressure. Elias, a security guard on the graveyard shift, found the quiet was the only thing that got to him. That and the relentless symmetry of the place. Apex Tower was designed by an architect who worshipped clean lines and minimalism. Everything was glass, polished steel, and stark white walls. Nothing stood out, which made the small discrepancies stand out all the more. It started with the fire extinguisher. Elias was on his 3 a.m. rounds in the server sub-level, a maze of identical corridors. He paused at the recessed alcove where the emergency equipment was housed. The red fire extinguisher was gone. He frowned, checking his clipboard. Fire safety check in 3 hours. He pulled out his radio. Control, I've got a missing extinguisher on sub-level B, sector Gamma. Did maintenance pull it? The voice on the radio, bored and static-laced, replied, Negative, Elias. All equipment accounted for on the roster. Elias sighed, chalking it up to a clerical error, and continued his round. 20 minutes later, as he was checking the exterior exit doors, he walked past the alcove again. The fire extinguisher was back. Not just back, but perfectly mounted, with a fresh coat of dust identical to the dust that had settled on the wall plate. He checked his radio again, but decided against it. He was seeing things, too much caffeine. The next night, the mimic grew ambitious. Elias was monitoring the executive floor. The floor was empty save for the CEO's sprawling office, which featured a single statement piece, a massive, abstract stone sculpture of 3 interlocking rings. He noticed that the sculpture was now 4 rings. He stopped breathing. 4. He knew this building. He had studied the floor plans. 3 rings. It was an iconic piece. He backed away slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs, convinced he was having a psychotic break. He went to the elevator, rode down 2 floors, then came back up. He had to be sure. The office was empty, the door locked. He peered through the glass wall. 3 rings. The perfect, arrogant symmetry of the original piece. But as he stared, he saw a fleeting shift in the polished stone of the base, a microscopic ripple, like the surface of cooling gravy. He realized the sculpture wasn't 4 rings or 3. It was trying to be 3 rings. It was breathing. He didn't run. He just stood there, paralyzed by the horror of the realization. The mimic wasn't an object. It was a shapeless intelligence that took the form of the expected object. This thing hadn't stolen the fire extinguisher. It had become the fire extinguisher. And then, realizing its error, it had unbecome it. It had failed to perfectly calculate the mass and shadow of the sculpture, and briefly grew an extra limb. Elias gripped his flashlight, sweat slicking his palm. He looked down the long, identical hallway lined with white doors. Which one was real? Was the floor beneath his feet solid concrete, or just a temporary membrane? Then, he saw his radio sitting on the sleek, black reception desk. He'd left it charging in the security booth 40 minutes ago. It wasn't just his radio, it was a perfect duplicate. As he watched, the duplicate radio emitted a low, wet click. The speaker grill widened just enough to look like a grin, and the volume knob slowly, deliberately, began to turn itself.